Hi everyone, welcome back to Story of the World Chapter Highlights. I'm Sophie teacher and today we're going to talk about chapter 23 of your Story of the World 4 books. Now the main theme for today's chapter is talking about how the countries in Europe were split and divided after World War I, and also some of the repercussions to some of those countries. And the second half of the chapter talks about Russia and the formation of the USSR. Now, let's get started. The very start of our chapter today starts in 1919, just after the end of World War I. Lots of powers in Europe said we need to come together and decide what will happen. Lots of these countries had lost a lot of men, a lot of women, and a lot of their country had been destroyed as well. And people wanted to try and decide what would happen. So everyone came together in Versailles. Now we know Versailles quite well. At this point, this is the palace in France that was built by the Sun King, Louis XIV. So all the main powers came together. The biggest three powers at this point at the meeting were the US, Great Britain, and France. Now, the leader of the US at this time was Woodrow Wilson. And the Prime Minister for Great Britain was David Lloyd George, and for France was Georges Clemenceau. Great Britain and France had the same kind of idea. They'd both lost a lot of people during World War I, and they were really mad at Germany. And their main thinking was, we should punish Germany. We need to punish them for what they did. Whereas Woodrow Wilson saw it a slightly different way. He thought, okay, we could punish Germany, but what's going to stop this from happening again? I think we need to prevent wars from happening again. So he laid out 14 points that he thought were important to discuss during this meeting. But there was 3 points that were the most important. Now, the first thing he said was that all countries should make their armies and their collection of weapons smaller. He thought this would stop countries from going to war again if they had less people fighting and less weapons to do it with. The second thing he said was that every country should govern itself independently. He thought this was one of the issues that had led to World War I in the first place, was countries ruling over other countries. And the third thing he said was that every country should be part of the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations was something that Woodrow Wilson had put together. It was more of an idea at this point, and it hadn't actually, come to fruition. It hadn't really happened yet, but this was an idea he had. And the League of Nations was basically going to be created to prevent those future wars. And it would kind of bring people together in cooperation and diplomacy. That was his dream. He really wanted to start the League of Nations. So what they ended up doing, they ended up signing this document, and it was called the Versailles Peace Settlement. And everyone had to agree to it, including the winners and losers of World War I. So they all signed it. And what happened was they decided to form the League of Nations to prevent any further wars. And they also made decisions on changes to the map of Europe. So we're going to have a little look at that. Now, there's a really, really good picture, a map in your books this week, and I really recommend looking at that map because it was really help you outline the different ways areas have changed. So if you're getting a little confused with which countries are where and how they've split, I really recommend looking at the map. It's at the very start of the chapter. So I really recommend that because my map is not as good as the one in the book. But this is kind of the brand new map. And what I've said here is it may change without warning. As we know with Europe, these things can change very quickly. So this is not to say that this lasted for a very long time. Now, there's lots of new things to remember here. This is why I really recommend looking at that map in your book to help you understand what was going on. But if you remember at the start of World War I, there was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, obviously, they were on the other side to France and Great Britain and the United States. So after the end of World War I, both those countries were separated. And this is where we get Austria and Hungary, which are both countries today. So Austria and Hungary, they were put together. Now, some of the northern land of Austria and Hungary were put together, and that became the area known as Czechoslovakia. At the top here, we have lots happening. So Germany obviously had a lot of its land taken off it. That was one of the punishments it had for, the end of the war. And some of Poland got its land. And also we have these three nations up here, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They all got their independence at the end of World War One. Now, at the bottom here, we have something else happening. Lots of other countries were put together to become one larger country called Yugoslavia. This included Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, and Montenegro. They were all put together. Kind of like, if you remember, a lot of these countries were in the Balkans originally. So they'd been put together into one big country called Yugoslavia. We mentioned all these here. So these are all the newcomers, new countries that have been put together. And yeah, like I said here, parts of Germany were given away to other countries. So Germany became a lot smaller. And also Turkey was divided, as the Ottoman Empire was also on the side of Austria and Germany during the war. So France took a large part. They took a part near the Mediterranean. And Great Britain took a lot of the southern and northern parts of Turkey. And actually, the southern part, near the northern border of Persia that we've talked about, ended up becoming modern day Iraq as well. So that's really an important thing to remember. Now, another part of this agreement was rules for Germany. They were really worried Germany would cause problems again. So they said Germany had to lose all of its colonies. They weren't allowed colonies anymore. They said the army in Germany couldn't be bigger than 100,000 people. They could only have 6 battleships in their navy, and they weren't allowed an air force or submarines, as these were two of the things that had been really big for Germany during World War One. And the last thing was that they were made to sign Article 231. This basically was a document that said Germany had caused World War One. They were the aggressors. Now, lots of German people were really mad about this because, as we remember, it kind of started with the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Serbia fighting each other. So Germany were really mad that they had to sign this document. And also with this document, they were forced to pay $32 billion to the other countries that they had hurt during this. So that's really, really important to remember. It was a lot of money they had to pay. Now, this made Germany much poorer and much angrier, and they weren't happy about what was happening, which would end up leading to problems later on that we will talk about during World War II. Now, back in the US during Congress, Woodrow Wilson went back and he said, okay, I'm ready. I want us to join the League of Nations. But actually, Congress didn't agree with him and told him no. So the League of Nations ended up forming without the US and without Woodrow Wilson, who was the man who had the idea in the first place. Now, the second part of our chapter today is talking about Russia. Now, if you remember, in Russia, the Tsar, Nicholas, had been killed. He'd been executed. So at this time, there was a fight between two sides in Russia. There was the side who supported the royalty, who were the white side, and then there was the red side who supported communism and Lenin, if you remember. Now, both of these sides ended up fighting with each other. And in the end, it was the Reds who ended up being the winners, the Red Army. This meant that a lot of the people on the white side were either jailed, executed, or a lot of them actually fled from Russia. Now, because of this, the Red Army was in control and Russia became communist. Now, because of this, Russia became a totalitarianism state. This basically means a country where there's only one party. There's no choice, okay? There's only one party. Now, a few years after this happened, Lenin, who was in charge of the Communist Party, died. He had a severe stroke and he died. Now, well, he had the stroke and he was alive for around 2 years before he passed away. But during this time, his kind of younger protege, his younger, assistant almost, or someone he was training, came in to lead Russia. And this was Joseph Stalin, who's a very important character in the story of Russia at this time. So after the 2 years after his stroke, Lenin died and Joseph Stalin came into power. Now, Joseph Stalin insisted that Lenin be placed in a glass coffin in the Red Square in Russia, in Moscow. Lenin's body is still there today, and they cover it in chemicals and change its clothes. And yeah, it's still able to be viewed in Russia today. They even removed his brain and tried to study it to see how to be a good leader, how to be a good communist leader. Also, he changed, originally St. Petersburg went to Petrograd, and they changed the name to Leningrad on Stalin's orders in honor of Lenin. Now, two main things Joseph Stalin did while he was, at the start of leading Russia was he created Russia and made it into the USSR, which was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Lots of the countries we talked about, lots of the areas that we said got their independence, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they ended up getting taken into the USSR. And they couldn't fight back because Stalin would kill them if they did. Stalin was also famous for killing a lot of people. Anyone who disagreed with him, anyone who went against the Communist Party would be killed. What his main dream was to get rid of the farmland in Russia. And he wanted more factories and steelwork and to make railroads in Russia. So he ended up making this thing called collective farms. He basically took farms away from farmers and put farms together where hundreds of people would work on them. And the farms were owned by the government. All the produce would then go into the common stockpile, which was sent to the government, and the government were meant to distribute it among the Russian citizens. But unfortunately, it mainly went to people in Leningrad, St. Petersburg, or Moscow. It went to all these places, and poor people started to starve. Lots of people actually disagreed with Stalin and weren't very happy. But what he did purges. And what these purges were if there was any dissidents, any people who went against them, he would either kill them or jail them. And the place he would jail them was called the Gulag. The Gulag was an area in Siberia, which was very, very cold, and it had these work camps. He would have people making railroads or working in stonework and things like that. During his time, Stalin sent around 15 million people to the Gulag. They were very famous for being very horrific places to be sent. And that was basically the start of Stalin's legacy in Russia.